Hey Sis, it's a weekly shakedown of the binary walls around us.
Breaking it out and building a bridge.
Checking our biases with empathy and humility and questioning the status quo.
So building allyship that is intentional and confident.
Hi, my name is Cynthia.
And my name's Isaac.
And we're super excited to be coming to you with Hey Sis, a weekly podcast.
So my name is Isaac and I use he, they pronouns. I'm a non-binary trans person and I've been openly trans for about, it's 2020, so about 8 to 10 years, yeah, so it's been a while.
Although with the amount of time it's taken us to get through 2020 so far, it's like more like 18 years.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, it's added about 10 years on top of that, it seems to be, yeah.
I'm Cynthia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a cisgender parent of a trans child. So our little one transitioned in elementary school, and they were their school's first openly trans student, but no doubt likely not the first trans student within the school. And I've been advocating for them ever since they've come out and just trying to figure out why they've been erased through their whole childhood in school and all around us, and how very little I knew about trans and non-binary people before I realized I had a child who is one. So, yeah.
So I'm sure your kind of conception of what transgender meant kind of changed as soon as you had your child, correct? Like when your child came out, or were you?
Oh, transformative. Yeah, like totally, for a pun on the word. I had no idea what trans meant. But my kiddo, when he got the language to be able to identify the stuff that he'd been grappling with inside him, he knew exactly all the language and what it meant, and was a real educational piece for us. So as parents, for me, it was a huge learning curve, and I'm just grateful I was able to take the time to listen to what they were telling me.
Yeah, and I think the biggest kind of like 180 comparison to that too is that the younger trans generation that is now coming up. Like when I was younger, it wasn't 20, 30 years ago, but the internet was still relatively quiet when I was 14, 15, and the time since then. You can find everything out online. Like I first found out I was trans because I was in a hospital program and there was someone there who was also identified as trans, and I was like, I now have a name to this like feeling that I've been feeling for so long, because I had felt trans for 4 or 5 years before that, but then I finally, once you find that name to attach to it, it's like everything starts lining up and you know where to go and you can find those resources. So I think the term transgender is eye-opening for so many individuals, but I think the definition of what transgender is something that's skewed often. So, because I find the term transgender really depends on the individual. Like it has an over-encompassing, like this is what transgender means, but it's very personal.
So Isaac, I can totally hear what you're saying, and I can imagine before you had a name to put to what being trans is, it must have been kind of scary, like those feelings that were going on inside you. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about what being trans means to you, and what was it like when you finally had a word to explain those feelings?
Yeah, no, it definitely, like kind of as I mentioned, it was very eye-opening, because once you find a word, because living your life as a cis female for so long, and you're like, okay, is this me? I was going through a lot of mental health episodes, which subsequently was part of not being able to find that right word, but like anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, like substance abuse, like things like that. And then once I found this word, it was just like, the clouds opened up, like it was like a whole new day. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things too, is that a lot of people don't realize that like just having a word for something that you're feeling helps validate that so incredibly much. And so like trans to me simply means that like you no longer identify, or you identify as something other than what you were given at birth. Would that equal to like your understanding of trans, or?
Yeah, I think I thought of it as an umbrella term for somebody whose gender identity doesn't align with their sex as a sign of birth. And that's a very clinical way of putting it.
Yeah.
But actually, when we should clarify, this helps to clarify for everybody out there what cisgender means as well.
That's probably a better question.
Yeah, exactly. You might be going, "Hey sis, what is this?" I'm like, "I'm not your sister. I'm probably old enough to be your mother." But cisgender is very cool. The Latin term. So cis is on the same side as. So cisgender is for anyone out there whose sex as a sign of birth simply aligns with how you feel about yourself. So your gender identity on the inside. So so trans. For some people, it can be not aligning with your sex as a sign of birth and kind of going completely the opposite way, right? And can be very kind of definitive. I was assigned female at birth, and no, I identify as a male. But for others out there, you can lie somewhere in between. Is that right? And feel not quite female, not quite male, and sort of gender fluid.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good explanation, because I think so often with like the term transgender, we get so muddled with the difference between like gender and sex, and that like when you think of the word transgender, a lot of people thinks it means like trans. You know, I'm not a huge fan of this term, but if it's used medically, like transsexual, like where you kind of 180 your like sex assignment kind of thing, which is so not the case whatsoever. Like for instance, like to break it down a little bit more, like gender is what you feel, and then sex is what you biologically are. So, you know, a lot of times it can be based on your hormones or reproductive organs, etc. Sex is definitely a more medical term. Typically uses, you know, male, female, or intersex, and there also are other options as well. Hormones are not black and white in any shape or form, so.
No, it's complex. It's totally. I love Oprah Winfrey with Janet Mock, a trans activist and model out of the U.S. In one of their Oprah's Soulful Sundays, having a conversation with Janet Mock, it was said that sex is who you go to bed with at night. Gender identity is who you go to bed as.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how you see yourself in your dreams and who is your most innermost sense of self, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And like gender, like at least for me, I always see it broken down into like gender identity and gender expression. So gender identity is kind of how you feel about yourself, and then gender expression is how you show yourself to the world, kind of thing. So some individuals, like for myself, for instance, I'm a non-binary person, that's how I identify, but when I dress up in the morning, I try to dress myself as masculine as possible, because of the fear of being misgendered or being skewed to be a woman. Mind you, I have facial hair and everything. In a societal norm, most people would be like, nah, you're, you know, a man.
No, yeah.
But that's how I choose to portray myself socially in order to align with, you know, my gender identity. And other people, you know, they might identify as something else, but represent themselves socially in a different way.
So that's a really good point, because gender expression and then gender identity, I hear this so often. People get really confused if they see someone who is, say, presenting butch or presenting, you know, more masculine. So if a person who identifies as a man wears nail polish and wants to wear makeup, does that mean that they're transgender?
Yeah, exactly.
And the answer is no, right? It's not. That's so your gender expression is just basically how you present yourself to the world, and it can change, right, all the time. And
and that being said, you know, you can identify as a cis man or a cis woman, and that doesn't mean you know, your gender expression has to be feminine or masculine or neuter or whatever have you. You know, you can identify as a cis woman, and you know, your gender expression is also like feminine, but you can, you know, be more masculine. Like women are allowed to do masculine things.
So Isaac, personal question then.
Yes.
So you use they and them pronouns, and you use he him pronouns. So if you had a preference and you wanted people to address you as one particular, would you prefer they them, or does it really not matter to you?
It honestly doesn't matter to me. Like I don't know, like I know a couple other people who like they just use they say he, they, but they prefer they. But for me, for instance, like I don't really care. It's literally just like anything but she, her at this point.
Okay.
That's kind of like my outlook for it. Like there's also like neo pronouns, which aren't like the traditional like he, they, she kind of thing. And if you want to call me those, that's fine. But like,
right, I know, and I hear new pronouns all the time. I see them in writing, depending on what country you're in, and that too. And I wouldn't necessarily know, but I think for me, if I don't know, I just tend to go with they, them, and just keep it gen neutral, or use the person's name, or ask. I mean, I always try to encourage people, like, you can ask without being offensive if you're asking intentionally. Only this past weekend, we bumped into someone who my kids were hanging out with a friend, and a neighbor wasn't sure of their gender, and they thought their name was a masculine name, and it was actually a feminine name in this instant. And, you know, we had to kind of have the conversation like, oh, no, well, you know what? Names can be for anybody. And nowadays, you know, you see lots of names that are used female, also used masculine, and crossing over. So I always just think, when in doubt, say, hey, I just don't want to get it wrong. Can you help me out here?
What are your pronouns kind of thing? Like, I think that's something that we need to start integrating into, like, our greetings to individuals, and especially in like professional environments too, like whole other can of worms. But like on that topic, it's really funny because my parents, for instance, they both have gender neutral names. So people would call and they'd be like, "Can I speak to Mr. such and such?" Like, and I'm like, "Yeah, here he is." Like, and they're like, "Ah, there you go." But so many people base names off of like what their genderification, I would say, is like based off of, you know, like Mike is a man name and Sarah is a girl name kind
We're
of thing.
so gendered, aren't we? We're like, wait a minute now, you're wearing pink. I still remember this. I'm saying this. It was my niece when she was like 3, hadn't started school yet, and so her socialization had pretty much come from the home and TV, you know, certain stores where she goes through with her parents. And she was at a McDonald's, and she pointed out to a guy who's wearing a pink t-shirt and was like, "Daddy," horrified, "he's wearing a pink shirt. Pink's for girls." Like,
where did you learn this?
And it's like, I'm like, not my niece.
Oh,
but
geez.
I mean, it's like we're ingraining in kids, which I think is why it's so hard for young trans and say gender creative kids to kind of find that language, unless teachers and that are helping to support them from a really early age, right? Because
and I think that's really important. Like, speaking of like kind of like school, because that's one of the other spaces where they feel most comfortable and confident, and that's where they're doing a lot of their socialization, because that's where they're at like 8 hours a day potentially. So we definitely need more teachers and advocates for, you know, trans people or gender diverse communities to kind of like speak out and be more aware of these things, and aware of like what curriculum they're. I would use the term enforcing kind of on youth, because a lot of times, you know, some of it is very, you know, cis centric, and it's focused on, you know, girls over here, guys over there.
Yes. Like, when our kid first came out as trans, I think it was, you know, I probably equated it a lot to cross-dressing. You know, I had seen Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and, you know, I grew up in Ontario, and it was, at the time, it was a small town. Gosh, it's Brampton. It's not small by any means now. And I did a lot of traveling, and by the time I landed out here in Nova Scotia, like, I still hadn't met anybody who was openly trans as far as I had known. I've seen drag shows and that, but to me, that was always the idea of, it was, you know, men dressing up as women for performance. Yeah,
and it was all performative. Like, as soon as like the night was over, you take everything off and you're like a man again, or a woman again.
Exactly. And I don't know, I can't speak for other members of my generation, but I do feel like I know from having spoken to other people my age, you know, mostly those who knew my child before they transitioned, and having to explain, you know, they were really uncomfortable with it and didn't understand at all that gender identity comes from messages in your brain as well. So I know, like, I was in the dark, but I'm not alone.
I think especially, you know, I'm not a parent, but I can empathize with like kind of what my parents experienced, because growing up, I guess I was very much kind of in that limbo stage of like, I very clearly did not want feminized like things, so to the degree that putting a dress on me was like a complete disaster kind of thing. But I was like a kid at the time, and I think, I mean, I'm not in any shape or form saying that, you know, if you're a female identifying child not wanting to wear dresses, that suddenly means they're trans. But I think there's a lot of kind of like key things that you can see in a child's history from since birth that, you know, might kind of lean them towards like, okay, they're starting to, you know, not be comfortable around the binary. Like, is there something going on that's deeper that I can't really get out of them, or they don't know the proper words how to describe how they're feeling? And I think that's why we're seeing so many trans youth come out, and it's not because trans is on the rise. It's because trans kids now have all the language and the words that they need to describe how they feel, and that we're giving kids the agency that they can be like, I don't want to do this. Like, I have the opportunity to set boundaries and say no. And that was something that, you know, a little bit in my generation, but definitely many generations before of trans youth had to go through a lot of, is, you know, not being able to transition until they were, you know, in their 30s or 40s and done their career.
And that's what causes so many of those like mental health challenges, like you're saying, you know, and why trans was so pathologized traditionally, because when you're not seen or you're not represented and you're feeling this particular way, but nobody's validating that, of course you're going to feel sadness and you're going to feel stress, because you're going to start to think, oh, there's something wrong with me, which can lead to depression and, you know, spiking levels of anxiety and that. But like, as we said, through like the American Association of Pediatrics and even the Trans Health here at the IWK in Halifax, once a child, a trans youth, recognizes the language and they're supported, those statistics drop from, say, I can't think off the hand, it was like 70%, you know, have suicidal thoughts, and that drops right back down to 3%, aligned with any cisgender child growing up in a family when they're supported and they have that language. So it's really important to note that it's not a pathology, and often the anxiety, the depression are not, they're more the symptoms of not being heard, and they don't make somebody trans, you know, and that I think is a big misconception. It's like, oh, let's treat the depression and you're not going to be trans anymore.
Or like, right? People have this idea that like being trans, or especially like identifying as trans as youth, especially those younger than, you know, 15 or puberty stages, like, oh, it's just a phase, like they're just in their like experimenting phase kind of thing. And I'm like, like, sure, it could be a phase, but a lot of times maybe they are genuinely trans. Like, what harm will it do if you allow your child to explore their gender, right? Like, you're giving them the opportunity and the agency to explore themselves and to give them the ability to, you know, start making those building blocks to figure out who they want to be at a young age. There's absolutely nothing wrong with, like, you know, you have a son, letting them go out and buy a dress and wear it, see how they feel, or letting them experiment with makeup, or if you have a girl, you know, taking her out to buy boy clothes. I remember when I was a kid, I used to buy boy clothes just because it was more comfy and had nothing to do with, you know, gender or anything like that. I mean, maybe it did, now that I'm looking back at it, but, you know, there was absolutely no harm in doing that. So I think a lot of parents, you know, are like, oh, I have to, like, protect my child. Like, you know, if my child is going through these phases, like, I don't want them to get, like, sucked into this, like, trans propaganda. But in reality, you're doing quite opposite. You're not protecting them. You're, you know,
giving them space, and freedom.
You need to give them the freedom to do it.
That's such a good point, because like, a phase is traditionally defined as lasting about a period of 8 months. When someone goes through a particular phase, generally it's about 8 months long. And I was totally in that situation. I remember sitting across from our guidance counselor, and they're explaining to me what transgender means, and how, so my child coming home and saying, you know, Mom, I'm not a girl, I'm actually a boy, and I'm in a girl's body, which is the language they had used. And so I was talking to the guidance counselor, and I was trying to make sense of this, and I remember I kept asking, well, what if they change their mind? What if I go along with this? What if I support them? But what if they change their mind? And the guidance counselor just looked at me and was like, what if they do? And I just thought, I had to step back and I thought, what if they do? And what harm is it? And that
Yeah.
that was it. It really put it into perspective that really, so what if they do? I've given my child that opportunity to explore who they are and know that, you know, I took away that fear of rejection.
I think that's the biggest thing,
right?
is that when you lay, you know, the building blocks there that you can identify as this or you can dress like this, you're telling your child automatically that you're a safe space. That in the future, you know, they're going to come to you if they have issues regarding relationships, like other people, like not gender related things. You're telling them that you're a safe space and you're giving them the freedom to do what they want, and you trust their instincts and you trust their decisions. I think that's probably the biggest thing that, you know, parents of gender diverse kids seem to struggle with, is that like, what if it's a phase? But it's exactly as you said, like, what if it's a phase? Like,
yeah, but now there's a lot of trolls online, and like, and sometimes like when you're you know, you're educating, and then you get that pushback of somebody going, yeah, but you know, when I was little, I wanted to be a frog, but I can't be a frog when I grow up. So should we be humoring our kids?
Yeah.
You know, and I find that really frustrating. But like, what do you say to that? Like, what do you, you know?
I mean, like, I don't know, like, whenever people make those kind of, like, trolling comments, like, oh, like, attack helicopter or whatever, like, those drive me up the wall, but, I'm like, yeah, like, who is it hurting? Like, genuinely, who is it hurting? Like, what child, my partner and I were actually joking about this a little bit ago, but, like, what child hasn't gone out in the woods as a child and, like, pretended to be, like, a wolf or a horse or, like, a cat or something?
Yeah.
Like, who hasn't done that? Or, like, you know, it gets to a point, like, if your child is starting to their exploration, and they're starting to get a little, you know, too into it, that you're like, okay, you know,
you have to walk to the store today.
You have to walk to the store today. We have to do these things, but you know, so many pediatric doctors will tell you that like a lot of those things are clearly phases, because they eventually, you know, in that 8-month period, they might extend for a little bit longer, but after 8 months, it'll go away. So what's the harm in your child identifying as a frog? If they want to identify as a frog, cool, awesome. If that makes them happy, like, why should you tell them, like, hey, don't do this, right?
Well, you know what's really beautiful is my little one, who is trans, my youngest of 3, actually, when they were younger, had said, I really want to be a butterfly when I grow up.
Well, that's
and
true.
I remember them kneeling inside our open dishwasher while they were bouncing up and down and telling me this. I want to be a butterfly when I grow up. And in essence, they kind of did. You know, aren't all children. They kind of just transform and bloom as they grow. But for me, metaphorically, I look back and I think, you know what? You are a butterfly. Like, you are, you know, you're amazing. And you went through your chrysalis and were able to, like, you know, stay true to who you are. And they're so much happier, right? At the end of the day, I think we just want we want our kids to be happy. And everybody deserves to be able to live authentically and a happy life, right? So
no, exactly. And I think something else we should dive into here just is the differences of transition, just kind of even on the topic of like a butterfly and like going through that chrysalis phase. This is kind of my opinion on it, and everyone in the universe is going to have different opinions on what different types of transitioning there is, but I say it's kind of broken down into 2 categories, is that there's a social transition and then there can be a medical transition, and neither of those are necessary to be trans, in my opinion. I don't think you need to socially transition. I don't think you need to medically transition. I don't think you need to tell anyone if you want to be trans. You can be trans. You can identify as trans. That's totally fine. But if you do socially transition, that kind of encompasses if you start going by like a new name, start using new pronouns, you change your appearance or alter your appearance somehow. Haircut, clothing, makeup, etc. While a medical transition is if you're looking to do like hormone replacement therapy, also known as HRT, sex reassignment surgery, which is called SRS, and those more kind of not necessarily concrete things, but where you have to start getting medical interventions to change your physical appearance and stuff like that. So that there's a lot of, you know, controversy even within the trans community that, you know, you have to medically transition, or you have to have dysphoria to be trans, or you have to, you know, this and that. But I think it, as we kind of just said, it breaks down to what's going to make the individual most happy. You know, you don't have to go, and a lot of people can't get medical transition, like don't have access to that. I have a friend who is a trans man, but it has a lot of, underlying medical issues, and they can't get top surgery because that could be life or death for them. So they can't access those things, and a lot of people don't realize that, and that doesn't make them not trans.
It doesn't make them any less trans.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's so true. I'm just going to touch on something because you said dysphoria, and that you don't have to have dysphoria. So what is gender dysphoria? Let's just throw that definition out there so people know that. Now, for me, my understanding of gender dysphoria, it's a diagnosis of the distress that some people feel with their bodies. So it's a heightened distress. They're not happy, and they feel it doesn't fit, and they want to make a change. And what you're saying is not every trans person feels gender dysphoria.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because I think especially if you look at youth who identify as trans, like a lot of them don't experience a lot of that distress. A lot of it is just like, I identify as this, and they're totally fine with how their body looks, and they're totally fine with their appearance. And that doesn't make them any less trans, right? Like I think it breaks down to the idea that so many people think to be trans, like you have to dislike your body. And that's not the case whatsoever. No. It's just, gender dysphoria to me is that like you need that disconnect. It's not necessarily a dislike or a hate. It's that disconnect with some form of yourself that you currently identify as that you want to branch off of. But I don't necessarily think you need, I would say you need gender dysphoria to probably medically transition, because that's a diagnosis, and I'm not a doctor.
I think you're right, especially for younger trans youth that come out and say they're before puberty. You would need a diagnosis of dysphoria to be able to even look at perhaps going into blockers, which we could talk about in a future episode, or the hormone affirming therapy, hormone replacement therapy. But it is interesting because that was one of the first things, and it used to just I found it really upsetting, was when our kiddo first came out, and we, obviously there were certain people we needed to explain to because we had to update names and, the pronouns and all that. Their first question would always go to surgery. Yeah. And it would always go, so are they going to have surgery? And I was always so taken aback because I would never ask them, are you going to have, is your husband going to have a vasectomy? Is your, that's just such a personal, and I don't know, like if they
Why are you so concerned with my child's genitals? Like,
exactly.
That's weird.
That's their decision and that they will make when they're, I can only help them right now, like with the social stuff because, hey, let's face it, I make the hair appointments, I buy the clothing and all of that, so that's up for me to support, but I'm sorry, no, my 10-year-old is not going to be going into having any kind of surgery at this point. Even if they wanted to, there's still so many barriers and checks and everything along the way to ensure that everything is done safely.
So when I first came out as trans, I got all those questions like, when are you getting surgery and stuff? And it was a lot of questions from fellow trans people. So I was like,
really?
Yeah. And I was like, is that required to be trans? Like, do I have to do these things to be trans? So I think it's really interesting because this was back in 2015.
So not that long ago.
Not that long ago, no. So
5-6 years.
Yeah, so I started testosterone in 2015. And when I started, when I was talking to the doctor, I felt like I needed to be like a macho man. Like I needed to do all these things. Because when I first started on HRT, like hormone replacement therapy, I identified as a trans man. But then after being on testosterone for many years and realizing, no, I don't identify as a man. That's not where I feel myself. I identify as masculine, but not a man. Because I still felt that uneasiness with that term. So there was a lot of other trans men, when are you going to get surgery? When are you going to do this kind of thing? And I'm like,
pressure.
Do I have to kind of thing? Yeah. So it took me a couple of years, even after just being on testosterone, kind of backtrack myself and be like, no, I don't identify as that. I'm non-binary. That's how I identify. And being on testosterone hasn't changed that. It hasn't made me feel like I need to be a man or that I need to, be hyper masculine. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that to go on testosterone or estrogen or Lupron or anything like that doesn't mean your end goal is to become a man or to become a woman or to become completely hormonal or neutral kind of thing. Like, it's just to be more authentically yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point. And to add a little more onto that, when our little person transitioned in the beginning, they almost went really machismo as well.
Yeah.
Like they almost, I know I had some family members saying, oh, it's almost like they're putting it on. They just seem like it's too much, like it's an act. And I was like, well, no, whoever they are is whoever they are. Yeah. But I think almost it was that sense for them that they had to prove themselves. Right? And so in the very beginning, like, it's like, oh, no one's going to believe me. I really need to show them this is who I am. Mm-hmm. And then it was with a little bit of time, as months went on, they relaxed into themselves, which is still like 100% masculine for them, but not as strongly masculine as it was before.
Yeah. I think that's so incredibly normal, like, for people who are starting, like especially hormones in particular, or even just socially transitioning, that you feel the need that, like, you have to, like, appease the binary. So if you're, like, if you are a trans man or a trans woman, or, like, non-binary or whatever have you, genderqueer, you have to be that kind of, like, stereotype. Like, if you Google, like, what does a trans man look like, you need to fill that, like, box. But we don't realize that that's a box that we're also putting ourselves into, and that doesn't need to be the case. You know, there's so many different types of trans men. Like, I'm 5'5". Like, I'm not a stereotypical man height. Like, when, like, my partner is 6 foot, and he always riles me up. He's like, oh, you're so short. I was like, yeah, I'm normal woman height because I'm biologically a woman. Like, you know, testosterone isn't going to make me grow 5 inches. And
yeah, I think we have to stop kind of defining what we think. You know, you're not a man unless you're 6 foot plus. Or...
There's too many things that we don't realize that we also impose on trans people to fill as trans people. Like, there's an expectation for a trans man, there's an expectation for a trans woman, there's even an expectation for anyone who identifies as non-binary, which is so weird. Like, how do you show androgyny or, like, whatever? Like, it's such a mess. But
so as a statistic, I think some of the statistics I've heard recently is like approximately one in every 250 people identify under the trans umbrella. But, you know, likely the number is probably much higher because we haven't been capturing statistics, accurate statistics. Yeah. I did hear that Stats Canada is going to start trying to capture more statistics around the trans community starting in 2022.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, which would be really great because it is hard to argue the supports needed and necessary. Like, I've heard even from local politicians in Halifax that, you know, the numbers aren't there. Their numbers aren't there to justify educating. And I just think, oh gosh, you know, how many do you need?
What's the number?
What's the number to not erase one person?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, what number do you need to start having an inclusive platform and, like, start including individuals of, like, different identities into, you know, your curriculum or your, you know, your workplace or whatever. Like I find that kind of conversation so troublesome when people base inclusion off of a number. Yeah. Well,
one story that super resonated around that for me was I walked into the Canadian Museum of Immigration and they had this display there of cogs and wheels, and it was a memorial to the St. Louis in World War II.
Okay, yeah.
And this was a ship carrying refugees escaping Nazi Germany, and they first, I believe, arrived in Cuba, and they were refused refuge there and turned away, and then they stopped in the States, and again they were refused. They weren't allowed to port there, and they were turned away, and the last place they came was Canada, and they were refused here too, and they were sent back to Germany, and most perished. They suffered horrible atrocities, but hundreds and hundreds died then in concentration camps, and it coined the phrase, like, how many is too many?
Yeah.
How many is, and those are those policies that we had back then that turned away and turned a blind eye upon people. And I think it just really speaks to our humanity on how every person needs to count.
Like diversity efforts, like when people try and we were talking about it the other day, but like the tokenism, like you know, you need to be authentically diverse and not like an intentional, we're going to include one trans person in the statistics just to fill that bucket role.
Right, exactly.
And it's the same with like, every other, minority group, like people of color and stuff like that. Like we all experience that very similarly, that, the tokenism kind of aspect. And I think that, that's very tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, cis folks, so thanks for hanging out with us for this half an hour of our very first podcast episode. It would be really great also if you have things that you want to ask us, if you have questions, you can safely email them to connect@simplygoodform.com, and we'll be happy to answer any and all questions in upcoming episodes. We're going to be coming out again next week. We can dive a little bit deeper. We've got lots of amazing topics coming up. For Hey Sis, I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Isaac.
And we'll talk to you soon.